So, we were having a long debate recently about comparing video games to tabletop role playing games. That conversation got us thinking about how much inspiration we both draw from our favorite video games. Not just their storytelling and narratives, but also their puzzles, quests, and world building.
The thing, though, that I started thinking about a lot in this conversation was that, while we draw a lot of inspiration from video games, there's also limits to the comparison that we can make between video games and tabletop games. Both, of course, are built around game mechanics, often narrative storytelling, but video games really show their limitations in what they can offer. And that also shows limits in what we can teach or learn, or sometimes even the wrong lessons that we get from video games that then get applied to TTRPGs. So today we want to talk about what lessons we actually can and should take away from our experience playing video games and remind ourselves what separates role-playing games from video games in a big way.
Now, don't get us wrong. It's easy to borrow ideas from movies, books, or video games when building your adventures. There's a lot of narrative hooks, puzzles, and plot twists that can all really inspire us. But role playing games truly diverge from those mediums in the limitless nature of player choice. This episode is sponsored by Headwind Studios, and if you've ever wanted crafting in 5e to be more than downtime flavor text, their new book Enshrine is going to deliver.
Every monster and plant has a harvest list. You carve out divine fragments, elemental glands, and rune-laced organs. Each material has a class and quality that directly shapes what you can create.
Crafting is about combining those materials into components tiered by power and forging them into weapons, armor, or cursed gear. There's no vague rules here, no just ask your DM. This is codified and fun.
And there's alchemy, which is based on the same system. You can mix mind and translocation to get a potion that boosts speed and focus. Add in a volatile component, and the effects might spiral out of control in the best possible way.
And it's not just the mechanics. These systems feed the world. There are rare creatures that can become treasure maps, ecosystems are loot tables, and even curses are temptations.
Enshrined also features a brand new class for 5e called the Fate Runner that uses time itself as a resource. And the setting is a cosmic horror / mythic horror inspired divine prison of dreams and gods. It's mythic horror with some real weight behind it.
The Kickstarter launches in October, and the pre-launch is live now at enshrine.ca.
So follow the links in the description below to check out their project, and a big thanks to Headwind Studios for sponsoring. Now, back to our episode. We have often praised many video games for their choice and consequence systems. I've loved games that offer this for a long time, whether it's more recent titles like Baldur's Gate 3 or going back a little bit further to Mass Effect and Dragon Age Origins, or back even further than that to some of the original Deus Ex titles, or the Vampire the Masquerade games, or going even back further to like text-based adventure games. Yet, no matter how groundbreaking they are, a video game can never really compare to what happens around a table with a group of people that are telling a story together, because video games are always going to have their inherent limits.
And we all are aware of these limits. An invisible wall you can't pass, a door that won't open, limited dialogue options, a hedge you can't climb, a puzzle attached to an iron gate with only one solution. Developers have to draw borders around what's possible. In a TTRPG, the only border really is our imagination.
Video games, at least at time of recording, have a limitation on how much they can procedurally generate and respond to different ideas. When you encounter a door in a video game, the only ways to open that door are generally going to be the ways that the developer anticipated that you would choose, whether it is solving the puzzle, finding the right key, or passing usually the weird mini-game, hacking or lock-picking mini-game to open it up. But at a gaming table, playing D&D, players can ask a ton of different questions. They could solve the puzzle, and they could crack open the lock or find the key, but they could also ask what else is around. What's the wall made of? Can I climb it, break it, fly over it, teleport through it, dig under it, or just knock the door down, rip the gate off its hinges? This back and forth between players and the DM is the beating heart of the game. If you've ever simply presented your players with a locked door and seen how they agonize over how to open it, you probably know what I mean.
Now, rules still matter, of course. In our TTRPGs, there are structures, there are guidelines. But the rules aren't limitations as much as they're guardrails that keep the story grounded and consistent. Instead of restricting choice, they provide a framework for improvisation. The dice, of course, are going to add uncertainty, turning every decision into a moment of tension. Success or failure doesn't end the story, though, it propels it forward into new situations. In a video game, often if you fail, you often start the quest over and you have to try again. But that's not how it works in a tabletop game. Failures instead propel the narrative forward in a meaningful way, and you evolve the story based on the outcomes.
Yeah, I actually think it's an interesting limitation of a lot of video games where, in most cases with video games, failure just means either reload and try again. There's been a couple games that occasionally integrate this into, like, I'm thinking Disco Elysium, where occasionally your failures can still move things forward, but in a lot of cases, video games just treat failure as either a stonewall or a do-over. And when they simulate freedom, they're never really able to escape structure. If we think of some of like our favorite open world games, like Skyrim or The Witcher 3 or maybe Red Dead Redemption or Cyberpunk 2077, these games present vast open worlds. Sometimes worlds that are so vast that they feel weirdly empty as well. And this is where, because what happens with a lot of these games is that when you extract the narrative from these games, from the open world that they have, it actually reveals a surprisingly linear set of narratives. And often what these open world games can be accurately described as is they're really more like theme parks. You get to go to Wonderland and you can choose, do you want to ride the Leviathan or the Behemoth? But once you get on that roller coaster, you are there from the beginning to the end. And it doesn't matter that you went to Leviathan first and then you went to Yukon Striker. Sorry, I'm talking about like Toronto's Wonderland here because it's
The Canadian Toronto theme park.
Right, the Toronto theme park. But it by and large doesn't matter what order you do things in. It is completely irrelevant in Skyrim that you are the master of the Mages Guild, the master assassin of the Dark Brotherhood. Like, your guild associations have zero impact on the main storyline. And well, there are certain differences in maybe Witcher 3, like those consequences come up a little bit later. Or like I'm thinking even in Deus Ex Human Revolution, like you could we lauded in our recent episode about railroading about how you can choose your approach within Deus Ex. You can sneak, hack, talk your way through an encounter. But at the end of the mission, the outcome is the same. And even Mass Effect gets praised for its consequences, but at the end of the trilogy, there's 3 endings.
And speaking of Mass Effect, I actually still remember playing Mass Effect 2, and one of the great systems that it integrated was the Paragon and Renegade system, where at certain moments in the game, a little button would flash on the screen, and if you pressed either the blue or the red, you would do a positive or a negative action, depending on how you wanted to play through it. Now, I was mostly a Paragon player, but there were certain points in the game where Renegade felt appropriate, but Renegade was always so extreme. I remember pressing the Renegade button during being interviewed as Commander Shepard, and I thought I was going to be like, I don't want to do this interview and storm out. But instead, I punched the interviewer in the face because of the Renegade button, and immediately I was like, whoa, 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 what was that? It actually always threw me off, and the next time I played through it, I didn't choose any Renegade options because the game gave me a choice, but it wasn't the one I wanted or the one that I would have picked myself.
The other thing as well, like, I love Witcher 3. But I'm just going to say that, like, Witcher 3, its ending basically comes down to, like, I think 3 or 4 different dialogue choices that you do not know that you're making the choice that's going to affect the ending at the end. And I think that Witcher 3 gets praised for that, where you're like, you don't know the ramifications of your choice until you've made it. But in a weird way as well, it also makes that choice like weirdly irrelevant, right? Like when you that's one of the things where, like, in Witcher 3, my big criticism of it is, like, it is actually impossible to tell unless you go and read, like, where those decisions are made, why you got the ending that you got based on the choices that you got. And I really feel that when it comes to narrative structure and narrative storytelling, even though that thing can be like true to life, like in a narrative, we actually want to know the hero made this choice and this was the consequence of this choice, right?
Now, I think that these video games, don't get us wrong, they actually should be praised because video games have come a long way, and I love the branching
Totally.
narratives and the choice and consequences. But when we do the comparison of a video game to a tabletop game, that's where we can actually start viewing these not as they're not faults of video games, they're triumphs in the video games. But it's that comparison to what we can actually get at a TTRPG table that makes us realize the severe limitations of that structure.
I mean, basically, right now, where with video games are, like, video games are like a kindergartner's sketch compared to a Michelangelo or a Da Vinci.
Which is TTRPGs.
Which is in terms of like the complexity and richness of choice that you can actually have because you have a human being behind it. Like sometimes a video game and that's the issue, right? Like sometimes a video game presents three dialogue options or narrative paths, but you're thinking if I could just ask this instead, or if I could just do this instead, it would lead me down a completely different path or solve everything. And maybe one day we will see that in video games. Maybe one day things like large language models and procedural engines and generative engines and things like this will get to the point where video game developers can actually offer something that is really robust and responds to you in a very organic way. I expect that the transition period of that is going to be very, very clumsy. I'm waiting for in the next couple of years when we get a video game that has dialogue options, that it doesn't present you with dialogue options, it just lets you say something.
Yeah.
But then what the game is actually doing under the hood is interpreting what you said and funneling it into like the 6 different things that the developers actually expected you to do. And if you present something like off the wall, like you know, in those old text-based adventure games, when you said something that like just was not programmed for, it would just be like, meh, try something
Try
else.
something else. Yeah.
Right. And I expect we'll probably have like an awkward transition phase of that again, because it just is like at a certain point, like the video game, the fundamental issue with video games, I think, in this is that they still have to generate the graphics, they still have to record the dialogue, they still have to present all these things. And and even though the engines to generate all those things are getting really, really powerful, the ability of our systems to do that in real time is still quite limited.
And that's why we're talking about human imagination is when you're playing a TTRPG at the table, your imagination is the engine. The possibilities are endless. You can do anything and imagine it, and there's no programming that will tell you that you can't. Again, there's the structure of the game. You have to work within that structure, but the freedom of choice is there. Like when we look at our favorite video games, nothing about the main story in Skyrim is going to be meaningfully different based on if you played a cunning mage, your run in and attack warrior, or your stealth archer.
Yeah.
Baldur's Gate 3, incredible game based on D&D. And it opens up a ton of dialogue options based on your choice, your ancestry, and many other things that you do along the way. But there's no avoiding the 3-act structure of the game. Act 1, you're still going to deal with the Druid's Grove. Act 2, you're still going to involve Moonrise Tower. Now, it's true that most TTRPG adventures also will have the DM pushing you towards specific locations.
Yeah, there's always going to be a scenario that you're faced with. And I think Baldur's Gate 3 does a really good job of presenting a scenario and giving you lots of different ways to decide how you're going to deal with that situation.
Yes.
It has some of the most freedom in that respect.
But
like,
when we're talking about at a table, the amount of nuance on how the players are going to get there, engage with it, solve it, progress the story. Compared to a video game, it's immeasurable.
yeah, like honestly, I would be so curious to do the experiment of like, what would players do if you just ran Baldur's Gate 3 for them at a table and you tried to present them with just the Druid's Grove situation? What other ideas would they come up with that you could do?
If you ran the Act 1 of Baldur's Gate 3 at 1,000 gaming tables, I bet you would hear 900 or more
Oh,
stories
yeah.
that are different
Yeah.
than the options presented in the video game.
I actually think if you ran that scenario for an actual table, it would just go so different.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I also think that it would also show the limitation where I think that um the players would also probably panic over the worms in their head thing. Like
Yeah.
I actually think that if I was gonna run Act One of Baldur's Gate 3 for a gaming table, I might actually try to see what happens if I just took out the
I mean,
the parasites, it's so important to the story, but, like, the parasite thing actually kinda railroads the story in a
the
way.
parasites are actually a terrible choice for an in-person game,
Yeah,
because if you don't tell like, I even started Baldur's Gate 3 assuming that there was a ticking clock on my life.
yeah,
And if you put that on the players and everybody's panicked at the table thinking that there's a ticking clock, only to find out later that there isn't, that's actually that's terrible design. It works in a video game. I don't think it actually
yeah.
works in a TTRPG.
And Baldur's Gate 3 also uses that as its invisible wall. Like, there's a bunch of points where if you go somewhere that you're not supposed to go to before or after a certain, like, that's when you just turn into a mind flayer and it's game over,
Right.
right? And, like, I personally think, not to do too many spoilers, but like, the whole choices that you can do involving Gale, which if you know, you know, and if you don't, you don't. But the things that you can do with Gale that end the story are actually, in my opinion, some of the coolest things that can happen because those are the things that players would actually do.
I mean, true, true.
Right? And that type of thing is where TTRPGs excel, right? Like, you aren't then limited to these preset choices. And the conversations with NPCs, allies, and villains are just you and other human beings talking. Like, the direction of the story is in your collective hands. There's no limits to who you can talk to, who you can persuade. This even goes further if your DM is willing to throw things out and invent things on the fly in response to player actions. I cannot tell you, like, we're in the process of filming our grand finale for Dungeons of Drakkenheim, Fate of Drakkenheim. And I built sets for a bunch of locations. Like, I built a whole Dwarven Forge setup. You guys didn't go there. And then there were other things where I was like, oh, they went there. I wasn't expecting them to. I guess I'm building it right now on the fly. And like, I'm willing to do that. And and like, that's also the power of like playing theater of the mind as well, is like, or a more narrative forward game that doesn't rely on miniatures and maps because you can just decide to go wherever you want to do. But I'm willing to jettison my prep in order to let the player freedom take over. I know not all DMs will want to do that, but as someone who has and believes in it very strongly, I love it when it happens.
When we're looking at a TTRPG table, the beautiful thing is that puzzles can have multiple solutions. The DM might never have imagined or even accounted for. We have so many spells and abilities that can
Mhm.
bypass obstacles entirely, collapse walls, blow things apart. The possibilities are endless because they're not pre-programmed, they're improvised. Players are going to surprise you with ideas that you never thought of. That's part of the game.
Yeah, and also, I don't know if you've run into this with yourself playing video games, but I've definitely noticed this with a lot of choice and consequence games that unfortunately, like, so many choice and consequence games, I find that I like weirdly optimize the experience.
Yeah.
Like it really like sometimes like you'll find out that like a specific magic item or quest reward is tied behind a certain choice and you're like, well, I would make this choice, but then I lose out on like the best sword in the game
And
or
I think
like
that is actually another limitation is I actually think that D&D, a wrong lesson that we take from video games is the lesson of optimizing your builds. I think that D&D is actually more fluid in the fact that you can have slightly non-optimized builds. You still want to make a strong and competent character, but video games teach us to pick all of these things to build this like Monty comes in all the time with video games, Expedition 33. You're like, here are the pictos that I chose to absolutely destroy the game.
mm.
And in D&D, we don't want to do that. We actually want to give into the narrative.
Well, I would also even say that a lot of video games, even the ones with choice and consequence systems, often have this notion of the good ending or the
Yeah.
best ending. Like Witcher 3 very clearly has the better end. Like in my opinion, like there's a bad ending, there's a slightly less bad ending, and then there's like the good ending. right? And for me, that kind of nullifies the whole choice along the entire way, right? I would also even just bring in recently, like Clair Obscure Expedition 33 has zero choice and zero narrative control in the player's hands for 99% of the game, right up until the very end.
Yeah.
And then it thrusts a choice on you, and you're kind of like, what?
Yeah.
And a choice that I personally feel, if you're like, I'll just say for myself, there's no way at the end of the game that Verso was beating Mael in a duel. So, right? And I think that that's where it comes down to, like, the interesting thing about endings. Like, one of the coolest things that we've seen with our adventure that we wrote, Dungeons of Drakkenheim, and putting that into other people's hands, we wrote the adventure to be open-ended and allow the players to choose their path and choose the ending. And, like, there was a part of us that was like, is there, like, a best ending in this campaign? And I think that some people that have just read Dungeons of Drakkenheim go like, oh, obviously that is the best ending. But the thing is that players never choose it. Like in a TTRPG, in an experience where things are unfolding organically and you don't have all the information, we talk to DMs where their players make such different choices along the way,
Yeah.
and they don't have the benefit of this view from 1,000 feet up where they can see, like, the optimal answer. And so from talking to the hundreds of DMs that have run Drakkenheim, no two of them end up the same, because the player characters, their choices, how they deal with the factions always bring them to different locations, and they always inject their own biases, their own priorities, their own interests into the mix of it, that oftentimes, like, prevent them from, like, hitting the optimal ending of Drakkenheim. I would even say there's debate about what the optimal ending even is
I
as
don't think
well.
there is
Yeah.
one personally. Like people, I find it really interesting because when we talk about Drakkenheim, this isn't a video all about pitching Drakkenheim, but I just want to say it that you know, certain people will be like, well, this faction is clearly the right faction to join. Why would anybody choose the other ones? And it's funny because they'll believe that 100%. Then you talk to a different DM who's like, well, the right faction is this complete opposite one.
Yeah.
And why would anybody pick the other ones? And that to me is very interesting because, okay, when it comes down to it, as much as we love video games, even something like Baldur's Gate 3, which is going to be the probably rated right now as the greatest D&D video game ever made, it's still, at the end of the day, bound by barriers and limitations necessary for a digital system to function. Even some of the most lauded adventures for D&D, like Curse of Strahd, one of our absolute favorites, in our opinion, it's still actually bound by a video game way of thinking, and it can funnel players towards specific concepts.
I mean, I think a lot of that comes down to, like, Curse of Strahd is amazing.
Yes,
It's
I'm not
it's
saying it's not.
and I will say that, like, every group has their own way of telling that they defeated Strahd. But, like, you don't hear the stories very often about the groups that decided that Strahd was great, actually, and they're going to join them.
Yeah.
Right? Like, Strahd is pretty unapologetically a villain that is meant to be slain and defeated. And, like, it's still, at the end of the day, it's a dark story, but it's still a pretty black and white one. Similarly, like, you don't very often hear about the groups that were playing Rise of Tiamat and actually decided, you know what, actually, this whole dragon god thing sounds pretty awesome, and we're gonna help summon Tiamat. Like, you just you just don't see that.
I mean, don't get us wrong. I think it's really important for us to say here that the Curse of Strahd is still one of our favorite adventures. And even when we say that some D&D adventures are very black and white, and they are very structured, and they
Yeah.
push you towards a specific narrative, uh, even with all of that, they cannot be contained by the unbounded nature of player choice and DM creativity. So the fact that as soon as you remove it from a video game system and put it at a table, as soon as it's placed at the table, it rises above even the most open-ended video game in terms of choice, consequence, and narrative freedom.
Yeah, Curse of Strahd as a video game is just another Castlevania knockoff.
Yeah, but at a table, the players can do interesting things and change aspects of the narrative in ways that you never could in a video game. Let's get to the point here. What can we learn from video games then? Well, if you if you boil it down, they still have within all of our favorite video games, there's a rich array of stories. There's incredible structures for adventures, ideas, plot hooks, puzzles, characters, worlds that we can draw on when we're creating something at the table. A lot of video games are based on puzzles. Not all of them work at the table. Some of them work amazingly. Some themes, some character concepts, great. Steal them, grab them, use them. But don't bring along with it the assumptions that your players will follow a direct path, choose the dialogue options you planned in your head, or if you're building walls, expect the players to blow them up. If you build an adventure site, expect it to be skipped or bypassed or completely undone.
I think one of the few games that actually does this the closest might be Fallout New Vegas. If I'm thinking like the New Vegas particularly, because but it still does. You still have to go to the Battle of Hoover Dam,
Yeah.
right? And the true magic of TTRPGs lies in shared storytelling, like a group of friends around a table inviting wild solutions to fight fantastical problems. Like Fallout New Vegas played with if you take the whole New Vegas situation and you put a bunch of player characters in it, you might not have a Battle of Hoover Dam, right? You might, but you might not. Every player will walk away and they will have shaped it with their every action, their every role, their every decision. And that's why we believe that truly TTRPGs are something special and easily the richest form of narrative game-based storytelling that we have access to. Because that scenario, like thrusting your players into a scenario and asking, what would you do? And giving them the freedom to actually decide from anything they can imagine, along with some dice rolls and some mechanics along the way, just is going to be way more powerful than the prescribed actions that a video game is always going to put you on.
So, to summarize this all, we use video games a lot for our analogies on this channel. We take a lot of inspiration from them, and you should too. But don't forget that the limitations built into video games don't exist at a TTRPG table. And if you have friends out there that are huge video game fans and love the open world RPGs and you're trying to get them into D&D, this might be a good video to send them to be like, this is why TTRPGs are better. Because we do believe that. We believe that although we can get inspired by so many things, I think the TTRPGs are really special. I think that they're one of the richest forms of storytelling in a communal aspect. I think there's something very magical about that no other medium can quite capture, and that's why everybody should be playing more TTRPGs. So, if you have a favorite video game that you have taken inspiration from, or if you have noticed video game isms seep their way into TTRPGs that you're like, we should be doing less of this, I want to hear about all of that in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. We have so many cool tier rewards for our patrons. All of them get early access to all of our YouTube videos. They get them a week before they drop here on YouTube, including our live plays. And at our higher tiers, they get extra bonus videos from us, behind the scenes content, extra rules packets and playtest materials from Kelly and I, and even full-on extra actual plays. If all of that sounds good to you and you want to help support the channel, follow the links down below.
And if you want to see a world that Monty and I created that is inspired by a lot of our favorite stories, video games, and books, you can check out our world of Drakkenheim. All the previous episodes are right up over here.
We've got plenty more thoughts on games and D&D and DMing, all that cool stuff. Check out our other videos right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. See you next time in the dungeon.